What happens when a beloved Hollywood icon walks into what should be a friendly late-night interview, only to find himself facing off against a host who seems determined to tear him down? The answer is one of the most shocking moments in late-night television history. And it all started when Ralph Macchio stepped onto Stephen Colbert's stage, expecting the usual promotional chat, but instead walked into what can only be described as an ambush. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling us what you think really happened here, because this one is going to blow your mind. The atmosphere in the Ed Sullivan Theater was electric that Tuesday evening as Ralph Macchio made his way backstage, preparing for what his publicist had assured him would be a straightforward interview about his continued success, with Cobra Kai and his enduring legacy as Daniel LaRusso. The veteran actor, now in his 60s but still carrying that boyish charm that made him a household name in the 80s, had done hundreds of these interviews over the decades. He thought he knew what to expect. What he did not expect was Stephen Colbert's opening salvo. The moment Macchio settled into the guest chair, flashing his trademark smile and waving to the enthusiastic audience, Colbert launched into what seemed like a prepared attack. Instead of the usual warm welcome and softball questions about his current projects, Colbert leaned forward with a predatory grin and said something that caught everyone off guard. "So, Ralph, let's talk about how you've been riding the coattails of one movie for 40 years, Colbert began, his tone dripping with barely concealed contempt. "I mean, at what point do you think it becomes embarrassing to still be talking about wax on, wax off when you're collecting Social Security?" The audience fell silent. This was not the Stephen Colbert they were used to seeing, the affable host, who typically treated his guests with respect and genuine curiosity. This was something else entirely, something mean-spirited and calculated. Macchio's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered, clearly trying to process what was happening. "Well, Stephen, I think The Karate Kid resonated with people, because it tells a universal story about overcoming adversity," Macchio replied diplomatically, his voice steady despite the obvious blindside. "And Cobra Kai has allowed us to explore those themes in a much deeper way, showing how our choices as young people continue to affect us decades later." But Colbert was not interested in a thoughtful discussion about storytelling or character development. Instead, he pressed on with what seemed like a premeditated assault on Macchio's career and character. "But isn't it true that you've essentially been playing the same character your entire career? I mean, when was the last time you did anything that didn't involve martial arts or nostalgia for the Reagan era?" The question was loaded with assumptions and delivered with a sneer that made it clear this was not about eliciting interesting conversation, but about humiliating a guest. Macchio shifted in his chair, his professional composure beginning to show cracks as he realized this was not going to be the pleasant promotional appearance he had expected. "Actually, I've done quite a bit of dramatic work over the years," Macchio responded, his voice taking on a slight edge. "I've been in films and television shows that have nothing to do with karate, but I'm proud of The Karate Kid and what it represents. It's a story about a kid who gets picked on finding the strength to stand up for himself. I don't see why that's something to be ashamed of." Colbert's response was swift and brutal. "Oh, so you're saying you identify with being the picked-on kid? Is that why you've spent 4 decades milking that same victim narrative? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've built an entire career on playing the perpetual underdog, even when you're clearly not." The audience was now visibly uncomfortable. Some people were looking around nervously, others were checking their phones, and a few seemed to be wondering if this was some kind of elaborate bit that they were not in on. But Macchio's reaction made it clear this was no joke. His jaw tightened, and for the first time since sitting down, he looked genuinely angry. "I think you're mischaracterizing both the films and my career," Macchio said, his voice now carrying a warning tone that anyone paying attention would have recognized as a signal to back off. "The Karate Kid was never about playing a victim. It was about finding inner strength and learning that violence should be a last resort. Those are pretty timeless values, wouldn't you agree? Instead of recognizing the warning signs and perhaps steering the conversation in a more constructive direction, Colbert doubled down on his aggressive approach. He leaned back in his chair with a smug expression and delivered what would prove to be the comment that pushed Ralph Macchio past his breaking point. Timeless values? Really? Because what I see is a grown man who's been dining out on a teenage role for so long that he's forgotten how to be anything else. Tell me, Ralph, when you look in the mirror, do you still see Daniel LaRusso? Or do you see a 60-something-year-old man who's afraid to let go of his glory days? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. It was personal, it was cruel, and it was completely unnecessary. Macchio sat in stunned silence for a moment, his face cycling through a range of emotions as he processed not just the words but the deliberate cruelty behind them. The audience was now completely silent, sensing that something had shifted dramatically, and that they were witnessing something that was about to go very wrong. What happened next would become the defining moment of the entire encounter, as Ralph Macchio's decades of professionalism finally gave way to justified outrage. The transformation was remarkable to witness, like watching a dam burst after years of holding back floodwaters. His posture straightened, his eyes hardened, and when he spoke, his voice carried a conviction that cut through Colbert's smugness like a blade. You know what, Stephen? I came here tonight thinking I was going to have a conversation with a professional broadcaster, someone who understood that their job was to create an entertaining dialogue for their audience, not to bully their guests. For cheap laughs, Macchio began, his voice rising with each word. But clearly I was mistaken about your character. The directness of the response seemed to catch Colbert off guard. For the first time since the interview began, his cocky demeanor wavered slightly as if he had not expected his guest to push back with such force. But rather than take the hint and perhaps attempt to salvage the situation, Colbert made the fatal mistake of doubling down on his antagonistic approach. "Oh, now I'm the bad guy because I'm asking honest questions about your career?" Colbert shot back, his voice taking on a defensive tone that revealed he knew he had crossed a line, but was too proud to admit it. "I thought actors were supposed to be able to handle a little criticism. Isn't that part of the job?" Macchio's laugh was bitter and devoid of any humor. "Criticism? Is that what you call this? Because what I'm experiencing right now feels a lot more like a personal attack from someone who seems to have some kind of bizarre grudge against me or my work. And frankly, I don't understand where it's coming from." The audience was now completely captivated by the unfolding drama, but their attention had shifted entirely away from entertainment and toward concern. This was no longer a late-night talk, show interview. It had become something much more raw and uncomfortable, like watching a private argument play out in public. Colbert's response revealed just how deep his antagonism ran. "A grudge? Don't flatter yourself, Ralph. I just think it's interesting how Hollywood works, how some people can coast on one role for their entire careers, while actually talented performers struggle to get recognition. It's a fascinating commentary on our culture's obsession with nostalgia over substance." The implication was clear and insulting, suggesting that Macchio lacked talent and had somehow cheated his way to success. It was exactly the kind of comment designed to provoke a reaction. And it worked. Macchio's composure finally shattered completely. "Actually talented performers?" Macchio repeated, his voice now raised to a level that made the microphones crackle. "Are you seriously suggesting that I'm not a talented performer? Based on what exactly? Your expert analysis from behind a desk where you make jokes for a living?" The personal nature of the attack was unmistakable, and Colbert's face flushed red as he realized his guest was no longer playing defense but had gone on the offensive. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically, and suddenly Colbert was the one, looking uncomfortable and exposed. "I'm just saying that some actors challenge themselves, take risks, Push boundaries, Colbert stammered, clearly struggling to maintain his aggressive stance in the face of Macchio's mounting anger, while others find a comfortable niche and never leave it. Macchio stood up from his chair, something that virtually never happens during a late-night television interview. The action sent a visible shockwave through the audience and the production crew, who suddenly realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Standing gave Macchio a psychological advantage, literally looking down at Colbert, who remained seated behind his desk. "Let me tell you something about taking risks and pushing boundaries," Macchio said, his voice now carrying the full weight of 40 years of professional experience and personal integrity. Taking risks means putting yourself out there, being vulnerable, telling stories that matter to people. What you're doing right now isn't taking risks, it's just being cruel for the sake of getting attention. The accusation hit its mark, and Colbert's mask of professional composure finally slipped completely. His response revealed the petty motivations behind his attack. "Oh, please, spare me the lecture about vulnerability from someone who's made millions playing the same character over and over again. At least I'm honest about what I do." The word honest seemed to trigger something in Macchio, as if it represented everything that was wrong with Colbert's approach. Honest? You think ambushing a guest with personal attacks and disguising it as journalism is honest? You think using your platform to bully someone is honest? Because I've got news for you. Stephen, that's not honesty, that's cowardice. The word cowardice hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. It was a direct challenge to Colbert's character, delivered with such conviction that even the host seemed momentarily stunned by its impact. The audience was now completely silent, mesmerized by the confrontation, but also deeply uncomfortable with its intensity. Colbert's response was swift, and revealed just how rattled he had become. "Cowardice? I'm the one asking the tough questions here. I'm the one willing to say what everyone else is thinking, but is too polite to mention." Macchio's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "Tough questions? You call personal insults tough questions? Let me ask you a tough question, Stephen. When did you decide that your job was to tear people down instead of building them up? When did you become the kind of person who uses their position of power to humiliate guests who come here in good faith?" The question struck at the heart of what talk show hosting should be about, and Colbert's inability to answer it revealed everything about his motivations. Instead of responding to the substance of Macchio's challenge, he fell back on sarcasm and deflection. "Oh, I see. So now I'm supposed to be your cheerleader? I'm supposed to sit here and tell you how wonderful you are for playing the same character. For 40 years?" Macchio had heard enough. "No, Stephen, you're supposed to be a professional. You're supposed to treat your guests with basic human decency. You're supposed to remember that there's a person sitting across from you, not just a target for your comedy." The final confrontation began when Colbert made the mistake that would ultimately end the interview and create one of the most talked-about moments in late-night television history. Perhaps sensing that he was losing control of the situation, or maybe just driven by his apparent need to have the last word, Colbert launched into what can only be described as a character assassination. "You know what I think this is really about, Ralph? I think you're upset because deep down you know that your career peaked when you were 17 years old, and everything since then has been a desperate attempt to recapture that magic. And now, watching Cobra Kai, seeing you try to squeeze every last drop of relevance out of a character you created 40 years ago, it's honestly kind of sad." The words were delivered with such calculated cruelty that they seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. This was no longer about entertainment or even professional disagreement. This was pure malice dressed up as television programming. The audience audibly gasped, and several people could be seen shaking their heads in disbelief. Macchio's response was measured and controlled, but carried an undercurrent of fury that made every word feel like a controlled explosion. "You want to know what's sad, Stephen? What's sad is watching someone who has been given an incredible platform, someone who has the opportunity to bring joy and insight into people's lives, choose instead to use that platform to hurt people. What's sad is realizing that you've become the kind of person who gets their kicks from tearing others down. But Colbert was not finished. In what would prove to be his final and most damaging mistake, he decided to make the attack even more personal. At least I'm not living in a fantasy world where I pretend that one lucky break defines my entire worth as a human being. At least I don't have to wake up every morning and convince myself that Daniel LaRusso was some kind of cultural icon instead of just a movie character that happened to catch on. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the production crew seemed frozen, unsure of how to handle what was clearly a situation that had spiraled completely out of control. Macchio stood perfectly still for a long moment, his face cycling through emotions, as he processed not just the words, but the sheer meanness behind them. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried more power than any shouting could have achieved. You know, Stephen, I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've worked with hundreds of people, directors, actors, producers, writers, and I've learned that you can tell everything you need to know about a person by how they treat others when they have power over them. He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. Tonight you've shown me exactly who you are. You've shown your audience exactly who you are. And I think that's more revealing than anything you could have asked me about my career. The implication was clear and devastating. Macchio was not just defending himself, he was holding up a mirror to Colbert's behavior and forcing everyone in the room to see it for what it really was. The host's face flushed deep red as he realized that his attempt to humiliate his guest had backfired spectacularly. Colbert's final attempt to regain control was desperate and revealing. "Oh, so now you're going to lecture me about character? That's rich coming from someone whose entire career is based on pretending to be someone else." Macchio's smile was cold and humorless. "Actually, Stephen, that's exactly the point. Acting is about pretending to be someone else. But what you're doing right now, this cruelty, this need to hurt people for entertainment, that's not pretending. That's who you really are." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Colbert's mouth opened and closed several times as he struggled to find a response, but for the first time in the entire interview, he seemed genuinely speechless. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that the supposed host was now the one looking desperate and exposed. Macchio began gathering himself to leave, his movements deliberate and dignified despite the chaos of the situation. "I came here tonight to talk about my work, to connect with your audience, to maybe share some stories that would entertain people. Instead, I've been subjected to what can only be described as a character assassination by someone who seems to have forgotten that their job is supposed to be about bringing people together, not tearing them apart." As he prepared to walk off the set, Macchio delivered his final words, and they were devastating in their simplicity and truth. "The saddest part about all of this, Stephen, is that you have this incredible opportunity every night to make people feel good, to celebrate human achievement, to find the humor and joy in life. Instead, you've chosen to use that opportunity to be cruel. And that says everything anyone needs to know about your character." With that, Ralph Macchio walked off the set, leaving Stephen Colbert sitting alone at his desk, his face a mask of shock and embarrassment. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure of how to react to what they had just witnessed. The cameras kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing Colbert's obvious discomfort and confusion as he struggled to process what had just happened. The interview that was supposed to be a standard promotional appearance had instead become a masterclass in dignity under fire, as Ralph Macchio demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply refusing to accept it. His walk-off was not a dramatic storm out, but rather a measured decision by a professional who had been pushed beyond the limits of reasonable tolerance. What started as Stephen Colbert's apparent attempt to score easy points by attacking a beloved figure ended with the host being completely exposed as someone willing to abuse his position for cheap entertainment. The contrast between Macchio's grace under pressure and Colbert's petty cruelty could not have been more stark. leaving viewers with a clear understanding of which man had conducted himself with honor. So what do you think really motivated Stephen Colbert's behavior that night? Was it jealousy, a desperate grab for attention, or something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories from the world of entertainment.